Australia. Australia, officially the Commonwealth of Australia, is the largest country in Oceania and the sixth largest in the world. It is the oldest, flattest, and driest inhabited continent, with the least fertile soils. The country's history dates back to the arrival of Aboriginal Australians from Southeast Asia 50,000 to 65,000 years ago. The country's written history began with Dutch exploration in the 17th century, followed by British colonization in 1788 and 5 additional self-governing British colonies. The Commonwealth of Australia was formed in 1901, fostering increased autonomy from the United Kingdom. Australia is a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy with 6 states and 10 territories, with a highly urbanized population of over 27 million. The country is culturally diverse, has one of the highest foreign-born populations globally, and has a highly developed market economy. Australia ranks highly for quality of life, health, education, economic freedom, civil liberties, and political rights. It is a member of international groups and a major non-NATO ally of the United States. Etymology: Australia, derived from the Latin name Terra Australis, refers to a hypothetical continent in the southern hemisphere. It was first used by Dutch explorer Abel Tasman in 1644 as New Holland, which was later anglicized. The name Australia was popularized by explorer Matthew Flinders, who believed it was more agreeable to the ear and an assimilation to other parts of the earth. The first official use of Australia was in 1817 when Governor Lachlan Macquarie acknowledged Flinders' charts of Australia from Lord Bathurst. The Admiralty agreed in 1824, and the first official published use of the new name was in 1830 with the Australia Directory. Colloquial names for Australia include Oz, Straya, and Down Under. History: Indigenous Australians are divided into 2 groups: Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders. Aboriginal Australians are the indigenous peoples of the Australian mainland and its islands, including Tasmania, and Torres Strait Islanders are a distinct Melanesian group from the Torres Strait Islands. Human habitation on the Australian continent began 50,000 to 65,000 years ago, with migration from Southeast Asia. The oldest human remains found are the Lake Mungo remains, dating back 41,000 years ago. Aboriginal Australian culture is one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, with diverse economies and a population ranging from 300,000 to 3 million before British settlement. Torres Strait Islander people settled their islands around 4,000 years ago, relying on seasonal horticulture and reef resources. By the mid-18th century, contact, trade, and cross-cultural engagement had been established between local Aboriginal groups and Makas and Trepangers from Indonesia. European exploration and colonization in Australia began with the Dutch, who made landfall on the Australian mainland in 1606, and later Spanish explorer Luis Vaz de Torres. The Dutch charted the western and northern coastlines and named the island continent New Holland during the 17th century. Captain James Cook mapped the east coast, which he named New South Wales, and claimed for Great Britain in 1770. After losing its American colonies in 1783, the British government sent the first fleet to establish a penal colony in New South Wales. A camp was established and the Union flag raised at Sydney Cove, Port Jackson, on January 26, 1788, which later became Australia's National Day. Most early settlers were convicts, transported for petty crimes, and assigned as laborers or servants to free settlers. Martial law was declared to suppress convict rebellions, but social and economic reforms led to New South Wales transitioning from a penal colony to a civil society. The Indigenous population declined for 150 years following European settlement, mainly due to infectious disease. British colonial authorities did not sign any treaties with Aboriginal groups, leading to thousands of deaths and dispossessed lands. Colonial expansion in Australia began in 1803, with European settlements in Van Diemen's Land, present-day Tasmania, and the Blue Mountains crossing the continent in 1813. The British claim extended to the entire Australian continent in 1827, with the Swan River Colony, present-day Perth, becoming Western Australia. Separate colonies were carved from New South Wales, including Tasmania, South Australia, New Zealand, Victoria, and Queensland. South Australia was founded as a free colony, but its convict system was abolished in the eastern colonies by the 1850s. The 6 colonies gained responsible government between 1855 and 1890, becoming elected democracies while remaining part of the British Empire. The Colonial Office in London retained control of some matters, particularly foreign affairs. Gold rushes in the early 1850s led to migration, bushranging, and civil unrest. The Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, marked the largest overseas deployment of Australia's colonial forces. The Commonwealth of Australia was established on January 1, 1901, following a decade of planning, constitutional conventions, and referendums. Australia became a self-governing dominion within the British Empire after the 1907 Imperial Conference. Australia was a founding member of the League of Nations in 1920 and the United Nations in 1945. The Statute of Westminster 1931 ended the UK's ability to pass federal laws without Australia's consent, which Australia adopted in 1942. The Australian Capital Territory was formed in 1911, with Melbourne serving as the temporary capital from 1901 to 1927. Australia became the colonial ruler of the territory of Papua and New Guinea in 1902 and 1920, which were unified as the territory of Papua and New Guinea in 1949 and gained independence from Australia in 1975. In 1914, Australia joined the Allies in fighting the First World War, with the defeat of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, ANZAC, at Gallipoli in 1915 being considered the baptism of fire for the new nation's identity. Following World War II, Australia experienced significant improvements in living standards, leisure time, and suburban development. Governments encouraged a wave of European immigration, resulting in a relaxation of the White Australia policy. Australia participated in the Korean War, Malayan Emergency, and Vietnam War, leading to tensions over communist influence. In 1967, the federal government gained the power to legislate on Indigenous Australians and included them in the census. The High Court of Australia recognized pre-colonial land interests in law in Mabwa v. Queensland. After 1973, Australia's demography and culture transformed due to non-European immigration, primarily from Asia. The late 20th century saw an increasing focus on foreign policy ties with other Pacific Rim nations. The Australia Act severed constitutional ties between Australia and the United Kingdom while maintaining the monarchy. In 1999, 55% of voters rejected abolishing the monarchy and becoming a republic. Australia joined the United States in the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Trade relations shifted towards East Asia, with China becoming the nation's largest trading partner. Geography. Australia, the world's smallest continent and 6th largest country by total area, is surrounded by the Indian and Pacific Oceans and separated from Asia by the Arafura and Timor Seas. It has 34,218 kilometers of coastline and an extensive exclusive economic zone of 8,148,250 square kilometers, 3,146,060 square miles. Mainland Australia lies between latitudes 9 degrees and 44 degrees south and longitudes 112 degrees and 154 degrees east. The country has a wide variety of landscapes, including tropical rainforests in the northeast, mountain ranges in the southeast, southwest, and east, and desert in the center. Australia is the driest inhabited continent, with an annual rainfall average of less than 500 millimeters. The population density is 3.4 inhabitants per square kilometer, with the majority living along the temperate southeastern coastline. In 2021, Australia had 10% of the global permanent meadows and pasture. The Great Barrier Reef, the world's largest coral reef, is located off the northeast coast. The Great Dividing Range runs parallel to the coast of Queensland, New South Wales, and much of Victoria. The landscapes of the top end and the Gulf country include forest, woodland, wetland, grassland, rainforest, and desert. Australia, located on the Indo-Australian Plate, is the lowest and most primordial landmass on Earth with a relatively stable geological history. It includes almost all known rock types and geological time periods spanning over 3.8 billion years of Earth's history. The continent formed after the breakup of Gondwana in the Permian, separating from the African continent and Indian subcontinent. It separated from Antarctica over a prolonged period, forming the Bass Strait and separating Tasmania from the mainland. Between 8,000 and 6,500 BC, the lowlands in the north were flooded, separating New Guinea, the Aru Islands, and the mainland of Australia. The continent is moving toward Eurasia at a rate of 6 to 7 centimeters a year. The continental crust of Australia has an average thickness of 38 kilometers, with several main sections showcasing its growth from west to east. Australia's climate is influenced by ocean currents, such as the Indian Ocean Dipole and El Niño, Southern Oscillation, which cause drought and cyclones. Rainfall varies across the country, with the north having a tropical, summer rainfall climate, the southwest having a Mediterranean climate, and the southeast ranging from oceanic to humid subtropical. Climate change has led to increased temperatures over 1 degree Celsius since 1960, worsening drought and bushfires. Australia's greenhouse gas emissions are among the highest globally. Water restrictions are often in place due to urban population increases and drought. Major flooding occurs frequently after prolonged drought, causing major issues like flooding in eastern Australia. Australia, despite being mostly semi-arid or desert, has a diverse range of habitats, including alpine heaths and tropical rainforests. With an estimated 250,000 species of fungi, Australia's biota is unique due to its great age, variable weather patterns, and long-term geographic isolation. Australia has at least 755 reptile species, more than any other country in the world. Australia is the only continent without feline species, possibly introduced by Dutch shipwrecks and European settlers. The dingo, introduced by seafaring immigrants from Asia, is believed to have been introduced to Australia around 4,000 years ago. Australia is one of 17 megadiverse countries. Australian forests are mostly evergreen, with eucalyptus trees in less arid regions and wattles in drier regions and deserts. Australia is home to many dangerous animals, including some of the most venomous snakes in the world. Many of Australia's ecoregions and species are threatened by human activities and introduced species, leading to the highest mammal extinction rate of any country in the world. The Federal Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999 is the legal framework for protecting threatened species. Government and politics. Australia is a constitutional monarchy, parliamentary democracy, and federation with a stable liberal democratic political system. It is one of the world's oldest federations, divided between federal and state governments. The Australian government combines elements from the United Kingdom and the United States, creating a distinct hybrid. Federal government power is partially separated into 3 groups: legislature, executive, judiciary, and Senate. The Senate has 76 senators, 12 from states, and 2 from mainland territories. The House of Representatives has 151 members elected from single-member electoral divisions. The lower house has a maximum term of 3 years, but elections are generally held simultaneously. Australia's electoral system uses preferential voting for the House of Representatives and all state and territory lower house elections. The proportional system combines preferential voting with proportional representation for each state. Voting and enrollment are compulsory for all enrolled citizens 18 years and over in every jurisdiction. The party with majority support in the House of Representatives forms the government, and its leader becomes Prime Minister. In cases where no party has majority support, the Governor-General has the constitutional power to appoint the Prime Minister and dismiss one that has lost Parliament's confidence. There are 2 major political groups that usually form government federally: the Australian Labor Party, (ELP), and the Coalition, which is a formal grouping of the Liberal Party, and its minor partner, the National Party. At the state level, the relationship between the Nationals and the Liberal Party differs, with the parties merging in Queensland and the Northern Territory, coalition in New South Wales, Victoria, and Western Australia, and competition with the Liberals in South Australia and Tasmania. Individual members and several minor parties have achieved representation in Australian parliaments, mostly in upper houses. The most recent federal election was held on May 21, 2022, with the Australian Labor Party, led by Anthony Albanese, being elected to government. Australia has 6 states and 2 mainland self-governing territories: New South Wales, NSW, Victoria, Vic, Queensland, QLD, Western Australia, WA, South Australia, SA, and Tasmania, TAS. The Commonwealth has the general power to make laws, but its laws prevail over those of the states to the extent of any inconsistency. Since federation, the Commonwealth's power relative to the states has significantly increased due to the increasingly wide interpretation of listed Commonwealth powers and the states' heavy financial reliance on Commonwealth grants. Each state and major mainland territory has its own parliament, with the lower houses known as the Legislative Assembly and the upper houses known as the Legislative Council. The head of government in each state is the Premier, and the King's representative is the Governor-General at the Commonwealth level. Australia, a middle power, has a strong foreign relations pillar consisting of commitment to the U.S. alliance, engagement with the Indo-Pacific, and support for international institutions, rules, and cooperation. It maintains a close relationship with the U.S. through the ANZUS Pact and its status as a major non-NATO ally. In the Indo-Pacific, Australia seeks to increase trade ties through open flow of trade and capital while managing the rise of Chinese power. The country is a member of several regional and international organizations, reflecting its commitment to multilateralism. Australia is also a member of several defense, intelligence, and security groupings, including the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the ANZUS Alliance, the AUKUS Security Treaty, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Five Power Defense Arrangements, and the Reciprocal Access Defense and Security Agreement with Japan. It has pursued international trade liberalization, leading the formation of the Cairns Group and Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Australia has entered into multilateral free trade agreements with the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand. Australia's foreign policy is highly concentrated in the Prime Minister and National Security Committee, with major decisions made without cabinet approval. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade supports the executive government in its policy decisions. Australia's armed forces are managed by the Australian Defence Force, ADF, and the Department of Defence, known as Defence. The ADF, which includes the Royal Australian Navy, Australian Army, and Royal Australian Air Force, has 84,865 serving personnel in 2021. The Department of Defence, led by the Secretary of Defence, is the civilian wing, with the Governor-General holding the title of Commander-in-Chief. The executive branch of the Commonwealth Government controls the military through the Minister of Defence. Major Australian intelligence agencies include the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, the Australian Signals Directorate, and the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation. In 2022, defence spending was 1.9% of GDP, the world's 13th largest defence budget. Australia has strong protections for civil and political rights, including the Constitution, the Racial Discrimination Act 1975, the Sex Discrimination Act 1984, the Disability Discrimination Act 1992, and the Age Discrimination Act 2004. Same-sex marriage is legal since 2017. International organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have expressed concerns about asylum seeker policy, Indigenous deaths in custody, lack of rights protection, and protesting laws. Economy. Australia's high-income mixed-market economy is rich in natural resources and ranks as the world's 14th largest by nominal terms and 18th largest by PPP. With a labor force of 13.5 million, Australia has a high unemployment rate of 3.5%. The country has a high poverty rate, with 3.2 million children under 15 living in relative poverty. The Australian dollar is the national currency, used by 3 Pacific Island states: Kiribati, Nauru, and Tuvalu. Australian government debt exceeds 45.1% of the country's total GDP, and its house prices are among the highest in the world. The large service sector accounts for about 71.2% of total GDP, followed by the industrial sector, 25.3%. Australia is the world's 21st largest exporter and 24th largest importer, with China being its largest trading partner. The country has high levels of competitiveness and economic freedom, ranking 5th in the Human Development Index in 2021 and 12th in the Index of Economic Freedom and 19th in the Global Competitiveness Report. In 2019, Australia generated 27.7% of its electricity from renewable sources, exceeding the target set by the Commonwealth Government in 2009. In science and technology, Australia spent $35.6 billion on research and development in 2019, allocating about 1.79% of GDP. The Australian tech sector combined contributes $167 billion a year to the economy and employs 861,000 people. Australia ranks 24th in the Global Innovation Index 2023. Demographics. Australia has a sparsely populated country with an average population density of 3.4 persons per square kilometer, primarily concentrated on the East Coast. The country is highly urbanized, with 67% of the population living in Greater Capital City statistical areas. However, Australia is experiencing a demographic shift towards an older population, with more retirees and fewer working-age individuals. In 2015, 2.15% of the population lived overseas, making it one of the lowest proportions globally. Between 1788 and the Second World War, the majority of settlers and immigrants in Australia came from the British Isles, with significant immigration from China and Germany. After the 19th century, Australia relaxed its White Australia policy, allowing for a wave of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. Overt racial discrimination ended in 1973, and multiculturalism became official policy. Today, Australia has the world's 8th largest immigrant population, with immigrants accounting for 30% of the population. In 2022 to 23, 212,789 permanent migrants were admitted, with a net migration population gain of 518,000 people. The Australian Bureau of Statistics asks residents to nominate up to 2 ancestries each census, with the most commonly nominated ancestry groups being European, Oceanian, Asian, North African and Middle Eastern, peoples of the Americas, and Sub-Saharan African. The most commonly nominated individual ancestries were English, Australian, Irish, Scottish, Chinese, Italian, German, Indian, Aboriginal, Greek, Filipino, Dutch, Vietnamese, and Lebanese. English is the official and national language of Australia, with a distinctive accent and lexicon. General Australian is the standard dialect, and Auslan is the Australian Sign Language used by 16,242 people at the 2021 census. English was the only language spoken at home for 72% of the population, followed by Mandarin, 2.7%, Arabic, 1.4%, Vietnamese, 1.3%, Cantonese, 1.2%, and Punjabi, 0.9%. Over 250 Australian Aboriginal languages exist, with over 120 varieties in use or being revived. Yumplatak, Jamburpwingu, and Pichinchichara are among the most widely spoken. NILS and the Australian Bureau of Statistics use different classifications for Indigenous Australian languages. Australia has no state religion, but states still have the power to pass religiously discriminatory laws. At the 2021 census, 38.9% of the population identified as having no religion, with Christianity being the largest religion. Non-Christian religions include Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Judaism. In 2021, under 8,000 people declared an affiliation with traditional Aboriginal religions. Australia's life expectancy is the 5th highest in the world, with 83 years for males and 85 years for females. The country has the highest rate of skin cancer and cigarette smoking, with hypertension and obesity being the 2nd and 3rd preventable causes. Australia spends around 9.91% of its total GDP on healthcare, with the Medicare scheme becoming universal in 1981. The states manage hospitals and outpatient services, while the Commonwealth funds the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme and general practice. Australia ranks 35th in the world for its proportion of obese women and near the top of developed nations for its proportion of obese adults. Education in Australia is compulsory, with individual states and territories primarily responsible for the education. The Commonwealth has significant influence through funding agreements, and a national curriculum has been implemented since 2014. Children are required to attend school from around 5 until about 16, with some states requiring them to attend school or participate in vocational training. Australia has an adult literacy rate of 99%, but 44% of the population lacks high literary and numeracy competence. The country has 37 government-funded universities, 3 private universities, and a state-based vocational training system called TAFE. About 58% of Australians aged 25 to 64 have vocational or tertiary qualifications, with a tertiary graduation rate of 49%. 30.9% of the population has attained a higher education qualification. Australia has the highest ratio of international students per head of population, with 812,000 international students enrolled in the nation's universities and vocational institutions in 2019. Education is Australia's third-largest export and contributed over $28 billion to the economy in 2016 to 17. Culture. Contemporary Australian culture is influenced by Indigenous traditions, Anglo-Celtic heritage, and post-1945 multicultural immigration. The evolution of Australian culture since British colonisation has led to distinctive cultural traits such as egalitarianism, mateship, irreverence, and a lack of formality. New citizens and visa holders are required to commit to Australian values, which include respect for individual freedom, recognition of the rule of law, opposition to racial, gender, and religious discrimination, and an understanding of the fair go. Arts in Australia include over 100,000 Aboriginal rock art sites, with traditional designs, patterns, and stories infusing contemporary Indigenous Australian art. The Heidelberg School, the first distinctly Australian movement in Western art, gave expression to nationalist sentiments in the lead-up to Federation. Modernists like Margaret Preston and Clarice Beckett explored new artistic trends, while Aboriginal watercolorist Albert Namatjira and other post-war artists remained central to the landscape. Australian literature grew slowly in the decades following European settlement, but Indigenous oral traditions, such as the 19th century bush poem, Waltzing Matilda, are much older. Australian Booker Prize winners include Peter Carey, Thomas Keneally, and Richard Flanagan, and Australian public intellectuals have written seminal works in their respective fields. In the performing arts, Aboriginal peoples have traditions of religious and secular song, dance, and rhythmic music, often performed in corroboras. Many performing arts companies receive funding through the Australian government's Australia Council, and ballet and dance are represented by the Australian Ballet and various state companies. The Story of the Kelly Gang, 1906, was the first feature-length narrative film, boosting Australian cinema during the silent film era. After World War I, Hollywood dominated the industry, and by the 1960s, Australian film production had ceased. The Australian New Wave of the 1970s brought successful films exploring national identity themes, such as Picnic at Hanging Rock and Wake in Fright. Australian films delivered a 7.7% share of the local box office in 2015. Australia has 2 public broadcasters, 3 commercial television networks, several pay TV services, and numerous public, non-profit television and radio stations. In 2020, Australia ranked 25th on a list of 180 countries ranked by press freedom, behind New Zealand, but ahead of the United Kingdom and United States. Indigenous Australian groups primarily ate bush tucker, a hunter-gatherer diet of native fauna and flora. This diet gained popularity among non-Indigenous Australians since the 1970s. British and Irish cuisine, Chinese migrants, and post-war migrants transformed Australian cuisine, introducing new fusion dishes like espresso coffee and cafe culture. Australians are a leading exporter and consumer of wine, with wine produced mainly in the southern regions. Beer consumption is also high, with numerous breweries in each state and territory. Australian cuisine has evolved over time, blending traditional and modern flavors. Australia is a major sports nation, with a rich history of participating in various sports and events. The most popular adult sports include swimming, athletics, cycling, soccer, golf, tennis, basketball, surfing, netball, and cricket. Australia has hosted the Summer Olympics twice and is set to host the 2032 Games in Brisbane. Cricket is a major national sport, with the Australian national cricket team winning 6 times. The country has professional leagues for 4 football codes, with football being the most popular in all states except New South Wales and Queensland. Soccer has the highest overall participation rates. The surf life-saving movement originated in Australia, with the volunteer lifesaver being a national icon. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history and culture of the Commonwealth of Australia. We hope you've enjoyed learning about this incredible nation. If you have any thoughts, insights, or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Leave your comments below and let us know what you found most interesting about Australia. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Ibn Polo Battuta, and hit the notification bell for more explorations of countries, cultures, and cities around the world. Until next time, safe travels.